And welcome back to the Financially Simple Experience. Today, we're going to continue our discussion about looking at the sales process or the sale of our business. But instead of looking at it from our standpoint as the owners, we want to continue to look at the business sale, the transaction, from the eyes of the buyer. From the eyes of the buyer. Many times we business owners often don't consider what the opposing side, or in this case, the buyer is looking, or how they're looking at our business. So today we want to dissect our clients or customers, our vendors, and our teams. We want to look at our clients, vendors, and teams. And you might want to say, oh my, based on the old Wizard of Oz statement, lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. So when a buyer is looking at your business, one of the things that you might not consider they're going to dissect is your customer mix. Your customer mix. Specifically, they're going to want to know if one particular customer comprises of more than 10% of your company's revenue. That would be a major stake in the revenue, is all hinged upon one particular customer. In Rockwood, Tennessee, where I live, it's a hometown, small Tennessee town. I love it. I love the back roads. I love the mountains. We have a beautiful lake, and just it's East Tennessee. It's God's country. But there's a small strip center, and in this small strip center, there is an anchor store. And the anchor store, in other words, the store that drives the most traffic to that little strip center, is a Dunkin' Donuts. And I love me some Dunkin' Donuts. I love the coffee there. It's really good. To me, it's better than Starbucks. That's my opinion. Feel free to make it yours, but that's my opinion. So Dunkin' Donuts brings a lot of traffic because of their breakfast menu in this little small town, their coffee, obviously their donuts. Well, attached in this same strip center, there's a small financing company that's really a no-name company that you wouldn't recognize perhaps if you're on the West Coast. There's a small restaurant that definitely you wouldn't recognize if you lived in New York City. There's a haircutting place, which is, it could be a regional haircutting place, but probably not in Las Vegas. So there's a lot of small mom and pops or small local franchises or regional franchises that's being held or supported by the anchor of Dunkin' Donuts. In business, many times we'll see where 80% of the revenue is contingent upon 20% of the customers. And it's the rule of 80-20. Where it gets dangerous is if one customer accounts for more than 10% of your company's revenue. What happens in that avenue is the buyer is going to perceive an increased risk. And remember, as we increase the company-specific risk, the value drops. So from the buyer's perspective, the perfect clientele mix is one that is diversified, where you're not dependent upon one key customer to drive the revenue to the company. So as they're dissecting this, they're looking at the risk profile. Do we have customers that account for more than 10%? One customer accounts more than 10%. They're also looking at, is the customer base made up of individuals, consumers, retailers, large corporations? What is the customer mix? We often say B2B, or business to business, or business to consumer. And depending on your niche or nature of business, then the customer mix may drive value or decrease value. They're going to want to know how long your clients have been clients of yours. Are you consistently adding new clients, or do you have attrition where you're losing clients? I was speaking with a medical practice, an entrepreneurial medical practice, and we were counting the number of patients that don't renew, and they were having attrition, what we call the back door. But yet at the same time, they had a lot of new patients coming in the front door. And it was weird for the type of industry they were in. It shouldn't have had this much attrition. Therefore, whenever it came to price to market, the value, because it was different than the competitors, was penalized because of the attrition of the customer's basis. Another one they're going to look at is your customer relationship. Do you have a long-term relationship with your clientele? I have clients that have been clients of mine for over almost 20 years now. Love these people, love their families. We have long-term, deep-seated relationships. And not if, but when things get miscommunicated or misunderstood, I'm not necessarily worried about them fleeing the customer pool. On the other hand, if I have new customers and things aren't exactly the way we would expect them to be, then there is a risk because of the shortened relationship. There's not a lot of goodwill built up. You end up not often being able to overcome that particular downside. So the buyer is looking at your customers. How are they comprised? What's the mix? What's the relationship? Are they loyal to you? How would they speak about your business? They want to know, whenever they buy this business, are your customers going to stay? If the name changes, are your customers going to stay? If you, the business owner, are no longer the business owners, are the customers going to stay? Think about it from a buyer's perspective. If you're fixing to spend X number of dollars to buy a business that's based on Y revenue that's been coming in for Z number of years, there's my XYZ calculation, then you're going to want to forecast using your pro forma that these customers are a trampoline effect or a springboard effect to grow the business or to maintain the business going forward. And so the more continuity that can be built into the processes of the customer pool, the greater the value. So they're looking at your customers. Another area that you might not consider that the buyer is going to look at is the vendors that you utilize. They're going to want to know, are you locked into a contract? Have you signed an agreement that says that you're going to be an exclusive, that vendor is going to be the exclusive provider for your business? Have you negotiated your vendor agreements recently? Is there room for some margin to create a little bit more margin in the business? So they're going to know these things about your vendors. They're going to know if you're working with one primary vendor or if you have a small group of vendors. I'm reminded back, many years ago when I had my landscape company, I had a job that was a multi-$100,000. I think it was like $200,000 based on my memory today. $1,000 job, a landscape job. It was sizable. And we had to put in some trees. I think it was 6 or 8 inch live oak trees and some magnolias that were 4 inches wide. I mean, these were what they call B&B or balled and burlapped trees. They ended up having wire cages and you had to have heavy machines to move them around. The holes could have been 4 to 6 foot wide in order just to set this tree in the ground. Had to have a lot of heavy equipment. And at the time I had one primary landscape nursery that I bought plants from. And many times they could supply me just fine. But on this particular job, they could not provide the plants that I needed. In a rush, I had to go out and pay a premium for the plants that I shouldn't have had to pay because I was relying upon one single vendor. And that single vendor and I had a great relationship and they gave me fair pricing, but I still was relying upon them. And then whenever a different position came along, I wasn't as competitive on my purchasing prices as I could have been had I had multiple vendors. So when a buyer is looking at your business, they're going to want to know what your vendor mix is. Are you locked into a contract? Do you have one single touch point within your industry? Are you using multiple vendors? Do you have solutions for scalability? What happens if we run into supply chain issues? Man, we've seen that this last year. Supply chain issues have been crazy. What happens if you run into that? Do you have other vendors that can provide to you? If you only have one vendor, then oftentimes you diminish your bargaining power. But if you work with a group of vendors, then you can negotiate at a stronger position depending on your flow of demand. So they're going to want to know your vendors. Who are your vendors? And then what are the quality of the goods that you're using? I work with a fair amount of dentists. We work with a fair amount of auto repair companies. Those seem to be two of our niches that we've worked with over the years. And in both aspects, there are superior products that can be used and average and inferior products. So you can, believe it or not, you can buy a superior crown. If you have teeth work done, you can have a crown that is high quality, that's going to handle much more bite pressure or chipping resistance than perhaps a lower quality. I've literally seen have clients who having to repair other lesser quality or diminished quality crowns because of simple wear and tear, that if they just use a higher quality material, they wouldn't have the problem. In the auto repair company, you can go to companies that are name brand like a Napa and get really good quality parts. You could go to I think it's OEM parts, original equipment manufacturing parts like a Ford or a Chevy or a Lexus. Go straight to the dealer and buy OEM parts. Or you can go with a Napa, or you can go with other providers that maybe are not to the same testing qualities as OEM or maybe a major provider. So when a buyer is looking at your vendor list, they want to know what type of quality are you providing your customers? Why does that matter? Well, think about it. If you're using sub-quality parts for your work, then all of a sudden the buyer could end up having some quality control issues. They may end up having to rework some shoddy work or some below par or below average work. So they want to know their risk. And one of the ways they look at that is through their vendor agreements or who your vendors are. Now, you've heard me speak about this in my first book, The Ultimate Sale, and I spoke a little bit about it in my book, Your Baby's Ugly. I haven't read it yet. I challenge you to pick it up off of Amazon. But I often talk about teams. And I got to tell you, I am passionate about teams. Whenever I speak about teams, I am talking about the employees that work with you. Notice I don't say for you. I have a hard time with that methodology that me boss, you employee, you do what I say. No, that's not the way a team works. That's the way a dictatorship works. And oftentimes dictatorships aren't long-lived. Just read history on that one. Of course, you can go back to the Roman Empire and probably prove me wrong on that. But nonetheless, modern history, dictatorships often don't work very well, and they certainly don't flourish. But teams win championships. Teams that play together, having the same mission, vision, and values in line to the same goal, win championships. I got to tell you, I can almost look at any group of employees and know whether or not the business is viable. I can look at the employee mix and know whether or not the business is going to provide the returns that the buyers would want. So let's dissect the teams from the position of the buyer. Remember, the better the team, the more attractive it is to buyers oftentimes. So let's ask the first question. Do you have enough employees to do the work? Or are you overworking your employees at this particular point? Do you have the adequate number of employees? They want to know that because through a transition is going to pour extra weight on a employee's back that they're going to realize they're going to do things that they often never done before. And if you're already overworking them, then they may end up having some attrition, may end up having some holes that need to be filled. They want to know, are you compensating your employees competitively? There's a fine line, a balancing act to pay top tier benefits and compensation to the employees of your company. If your employees are overpaid significantly, then it's going to diminish the value of your company. On the other hand, if your employees are underpaid, it's going to diminish the value of your company. Let's think about why that's a double-edged sword there. If you're overpaying your employees and now somebody comes in and buy it, you may have employees that appear to be entitled. They are receiving above market compensation. They don't have to prove their value to the company anymore. And it could drive down the value. I've seen that happen. You have to deal with that. We see it politically happen through collective bargaining or through tenureship. Oftentimes you'll see people, or you read, and I've seen movies about this, where people receive a certain tenureship or a vested ability and their performance wanes. And if they're not a stellar performance at the top, then your stellar performers end up going elsewhere. We see this often politically. On the other hand, if you have an employee mix that is underpaid and the buyer sees that, they're going to realize they're going to have to bring compensation up to the industry standards, which more than likely will cut into the NOI or the EBITDA or the EBIT, whatever the calculation is you're using to value the company. So compensation is a very, very important piece that the buyer is going to look at. Let's address through compensation also benefits. If your benefits package is over and above your competitors or what your industry would typically afford, then that more than likely will decrease the value of your company. On the other hand, if you don't have the competitive benefits package of a company that's typically within your sphere of influence or your competitors, and a buyer's coming in and now they have to additionally, perhaps your compensation is below par. Now they also have to add a benefits package. Again, your value is going to suffer. So compensation is vital, friends. You've got to make sure your employees are compensated competitively and that the benefits package that you provide is in alignment with other high quality businesses within your sphere of influences or competitors. Another thing the buyer's going to look at is what is your training or development programs? If you bring in a new employee, do you have onboarding procedures in place? Do you have a path to prevent attrition? Do you have a path to show that employee how to succeed? The buyer's going to want to see that. They want to know if you actively have a process in place to increase leaders within your company. See, this thing of employees is not as simple as I'm going to hire an employee to fix the problem, especially if you're building a business to where a buyer is wanting to pay you best-in-class dollars. You've got to think about the HR side of your business or the employee side of your business comprehensively. Employees that are well-trained and that are empowered to accomplish the company's mission will often bring the buyer into a position to where they're willing to pay more for the company. This is that intangible asset that I speak about so often. Let's look at this. Great employee relationships are pivotal for the buyer's perception on your business. Why? Because if you have a great relationship with your employees, the employees are likely going to survive the merger, the sale, the growth, the contraction, whatever it is that your business is facing. Positive and long-standing relationship between a company's employees and perhaps a labor union or the industry with which it works allows the buyer to attract top quality talent. So friends, as you look at your business through the buyer's eyes, realize that your customer mix matters. It does. The vendors you use matter. And candidly, how the buyer looks at your employees matters. So we're going to continue this with one more episode on this, looking through the buyer's eyes at our business. Until next time, friends, I realize life is hard. Man, dealing with business is tough, but life is good. We are greatly blessed and highly favored. And it can be frustrating. It doesn't have to be. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Y'all make it a great day.